part 2 of our Preparing for Headship session. This morning I'm delighted to be joined by Ellen Moss, who is the head of junior school at Silcoates in Wakefield. And Ellen's going to share part of her story with us this morning. So Ellen, I'll hand over to you straight away.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm just going to share my screen before I make a start. Sorry, already gone too far. Okay, so good morning, everybody, and thank you to Robert and to David for inviting me to talk to you about what to expect when you step up and make the transition. I know that a lot of you attended yesterday's event, so apologies in advance if I cover some of the things that Mark or Robert covered yesterday. But just to say, it's very, very early on in my journey. I've only been head for 14 days so far, whilst the school have all been on site. So this morning I intend to share with you some key aspects such as my journey so far, what it was like to apply for headships and the key differences that I've experienced between leadership roles, a little bit about the role of the head, what to do when you have been appointed, but also how to manage that lead-in experience between being appointed and actually assuming the role. What to expect in the early months in post, and a few hopefully helpful tips and advice. So my story so far, I have worked in the independent sector for the whole of my teaching career. I was appointed head of Silcoates Junior School in March 2020 of this year, actually 2 weeks before COVID-19 hit. I was due to assume the role from September, but the outgoing head actually was offered a post that he could start after Easter. So I actually assumed the role straight after Easter, which obviously was an experience in itself, because it was the time when we were actually writing policies for things like remote learning and actually experimenting with using Zoom to teach from home and that side of things. So it's been a very interesting journey so far. Prior to being appointed as head, I actually was assistant head of Silcoates Junior School. I've been here 2 years, so I had an idea as to where the school was going and the things that I wanted to do, which I think actually really helped when it came to interview, because I already had experience of the school and knew what worked and what needed to change. Before that, I worked with Robert at the grammar school at Leeds for 10 years in various roles, as a form teacher, as a head of year, in charge of assessment and reporting for junior school, and as a member of the extended senior leadership team. In my last year at GSAL, I also was a designated safeguard lead, which I think was hugely valuable. Prior to that, I worked at Ford House, Leeds Girls High School, as a form teacher in Key Stage 2, but also as a subject leader for maths and science. So I have worked in the independent sector for an awfully long time, and I was very conscious of that, and therefore I decided that 5 years ago I would seek other opportunities to find out what was happening in the state sector, and I became a co-opted governor at Seacroft Grange, where I've been for 5 years. I'm also a wife and have a very long-suffering husband, and I have 2 daughters, ages 11 and 13. So don't have much time to pursue my own interests. Being a head, being a mum is fairly time-consuming. But I hope to be able to share with you a little bit about what it is actually like to actually step up and be in the role. So a lot of people say that no amount of reading can actually prepare you for parenthood, and the same can be said of headship. When you have your first child, nobody actually tells you what it's actually like. You really have to experience it for yourself firsthand. And no matter how prepared you are or how prepared you feel, it's only by actually experiencing the role that you can fully understand the nature of it. And quite often it isn't as you expect it to be, and it's not something that you can prepare for, and that couldn't be even more apparent now we're living with the day-to-day realities of what it's like to run a school during a pandemic. I would say to be a good head, you have to really want to be a head, because suddenly the responsibility is all yours, and the accountability that comes with the job is huge. So I think that Mark yesterday mentioned a little bit about what actually motivates you to want to be ahead in the first place, and possibly what deters you from actually taking that leap and stepping up into that role. And also, what's the appeal for you? For me, I've always been quite ambitious and always sought new challenges. For me, it was more about having a little bit more autonomy to be able to influence change, to make bigger decisions, and to have a greater impact on the school as a whole. I know Mark talked, I've only heard 5 minutes of his talk through YouTube this morning, but I know that he mentioned a little bit about the fact that as a teacher, you really affect the pupils in your charge, but as a leader, you actually have a greater impact on the whole school. So I was very keen to have an impact on the whole school, and that was my motivational reason for actually wanting to become a head. I wanted to inspire and empower and lead others as well as the school. And I felt that as a deputy head or an assistant head, being able to initiate those big changes was harder to do as a deputy. And therefore, when the opportunity arose to apply for the headship, I seized it. So the biggest thing, as I've already alluded to, is the fact that you are the person that makes all of the decisions. Some of those decisions you can consult upon, but at times you are the one that has to make that decision quite quickly. Suddenly there is nobody that you can hide behind. People look to you for leadership, they look to you for direction and the answers to literally everything. So when contemplating headship, some of my biggest concerns were the high accountability that comes with the role. What would I be able to do in terms of handling the pressure, managing the workload? Would I actually be neglecting my family? I would say that trying to find a work-life balance, I don't think it actually exists, is very tricky because the job can be all-consuming, the hours are very long, and no matter how many hours you have in the day, it's simply not long enough. So that's something that I'm still working with to try and strike more of a balance. My advice, if you are an aspiring head, is to seek the widest range of experience possible, including in more than one school. As you can see from my career history, I had spent quite a long time in schools that were broadly very similar, and I don't think that helped me when it came to applying for jobs. So you need to take charge of your professional development and seek every opportunity that's available to you, and at times throw yourself in the deep end a little bit and take on roles and responsibilities that might be out of your comfort zone. I think that actually shadowing your head and working alongside your head is also very useful, and most heads would be supportive of that, and I feel that it's a valuable experience. So if you aspire to be a head, then obviously, as I've said, make sure that your experience is wide. Up until 2012, it was actually mandatory to do the NPQH. This is a qualification that I considered doing if I didn't assume a headship. And now that it isn't mandatory to do that qualification, I personally feel that having lots of experiences is just as or equally as valuable. But have a plan, be proactive, seek out new areas of responsibility, and actually come out of your comfort zone a little bit. You need to show that you're versatile, that you can handle the pressure, and just broaden your experiences. I know that when I went for interviews, quite a number of the panel would ask questions relating to school finances. So actually having a bit of background knowledge of how a school budget works and who actually can support you with managing a budget, I think is quite important. Fortunately for me, I have a really good bursar. We have a school business manager, but if you work in a a state school, perhaps you might have a school business manager, but you might not have a bursar, but there's usually somebody on the governing board who has that expertise. So it's about having an insight into the financial runnings of the school as well, that I think would be beneficial. In terms of the things that I felt that I did that really helped me to be in a stronger position to apply for a headship, was actually assuming the role of assessment and reporting leader whilst being at GSAL, because having a really good understanding of the data and how that data can have an impact on the teaching and learning and raise standards of progress and attainment is something that does come under the head's remit. I also became an advocate partner for GL assessment, and that was crucial in actually helping me to network with other heads and deputies in the area. I mentioned earlier becoming a DSL. Again, this is a more senior role which comes with it a lot of responsibility, and I think having that really strengthened my application. But for me, I think one of the biggest things that I did was actually becoming a governor in a state school. As I say, I've held this role now for 5 years, and I've been on various committees, including finance and the education committee. I'm also in charge of the head's performance review and the continuous improvement committee. So lots and lots of experience there, which has been hugely eye-opening, because obviously things like pupil premium funding and things like that don't actually come under a head's remit in a school such as the one I'm working in, but it's really, really useful to be able to have that working knowledge of how that funding can impact on the children. So the school that I chose to become a governor in was actually a very different school to the school that I'm working in the top 1% of the most deprived areas in the country, and the school that has 75% pupil premium funding. So completely different role. When I joined the school, it was requiring improvement, and therefore about to undergo another Ofsted inspection. So as a seemingly failing school, I had the opportunity to work with Anne Fell, one of the local authority advisors, and that was really, really useful and prepared me to support the school through the Ofsted journey. And I'm now pleased to report that the school is now a good school. So actually working alongside the head of Seacroft has forged a really good link for me. I've invited him in to do training here at Silcoates. I've actually gone and supported him in his role in his school, which is a completely different setting. So it's been really nice that it's been able to work both ways. When I was unsuccessful at interview for headships, I did seek constructive feedback. And the one thing that I was told on 2 or 3 occasions was that the person that was in role as a DSL was already trained up to take on that role when they became a deputy or a head. So I went back to the school I was currently working in and asked if I could do the 3-day qualification that meant that I could actually be a DSL, and that was supported by the school, and I really do think that then helped me to strengthen my application moving forwards. As I say, it is a role that takes on a lot more additional responsibility, having to work with lots of different children, external agencies, as well as families, and be that go-to person that teachers come to seek advice if they have a safeguarding concern. I think now would be a good opportunity for you to actually be able to mix with each other and discuss some of the things that I know that Mark mentioned yesterday. So in terms of what is it that motivates you to want to be ahead, or what is it that's holding you back? What is it that's deterring you perhaps? And what is the appeal in the first place of wanting to be ahead? And what would you like your future to be? So I'll be very interested, maybe in about 10 minutes, to come back together and actually hear some of the things that you've shared amongst your breakout rooms. So if I can pass over to David, I think he's going to kindly organise you into groups. those are the questions.
I think Robert has a master plan, Ellen, for this.
Ah, do you? Okay.
We were actually a reasonably sized select group this morning, so rather than going to breakout rooms, what I propose to do is stay as
all right.
together. If we all unmute ourselves, and please feel free to join in an open discussion as far as we can. I know some of you prefer to stay quiet, that's fine, but I think if there's a few people throwing in ideas, then there's more chance of us joining in and be able to challenge those or support those, rather than working in twos and threes where sometimes people get a bit more embarrassed. So if you'd like to unmute yourselves, show us your faces as well, by all means. And then has anybody got anything that they'd like to start us off with? Why do you want to become a head, guys?
It's nice to be able to see people. Good morning.
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 I don't want to start. That's okay.
Morning.
Is that all right, Robert? Can I chip in?
Go ahead.
For me, something that's holding me back is personal circumstances. I mentioned this yesterday in my talk. Really, with regard to my partner, my wife, her job, career, the age of my children. My youngest daughter's 11, going through common entrance. My eldest daughter's year 10, just starting a GCSE. So that whole relocation is a slight concern. So personal circumstance, and also something for me that I mentioned yesterday was that confidence in my own ability. That's those peaks and troughs that you have. That you are on the peak and your confidence levels are high, and yes, I can do this, and then you may plummet down into a trough and thinking, I'm not sure I can actually do this. Have I got the experience? Do I have the knowledge to actually do the top job? Those two things are sort of holding me back a little bit in the respect of taking, applying for jobs. My career is at a crossroads anyway, whether I continue to do research that I've done for the last year, or I go for Headship, which I still do aspire to, but it's getting over those obstacles, those barriers that are in front of me at the moment.
Thank you, Mark. I think that was really open and honest, and I could relate to some of the things that you said. Having that inner confidence is one of the things that was holding me back a little bit, and is something I know that I still need to work on, but also being considerate of the family and things like that. I'm fortunate in that actually my husband is able to do a lot of the childcare and ferry my daughter back and forth to Northern Ballet 4 times a week and things like that. So I think it would be very difficult for somebody in a headship role to have a partner who is working full-time, similar number of hours, whilst having quite a young family. So thank you.
Yeah, I would go with the same as that, Mark. I'm in quite an unusual position that I am a part-time deputy, which I am proud to do, because I know it is unusual that I've got that kind of work-life balance at the minute, that I've managed to get to the position I am, but I don't work full-time hours, and that is a big consideration for me with having but now my son's in year 6, and it's that kind of, he's going to be going on to secondary, but then having seen my older child, that they don't suddenly become independent when they go to their secondary school at all. So yeah, I think personal reasons are a massive factor in kind of that deterring you from making that decision. And for me, making that decision whether full-time is right for me and my family at this time.
I think it's a serious consideration, and it's got to be taken properly, because it is a full-time job. It's your school, you become your people, and they need you to be there at certain times, and you need to be there all the time, or ready to be there all the time. I will talk again, and as I did yesterday, about making sure you carve out some time for yourself. That's really, really important. But at the same time, it's your ship that's being steered, and you have to be able to make that commitment. And you can get the routine weeks where everything goes swimming along really nicely, but there's always something that'll come out of the woodwork, something that will get thrown at you that takes up a disproportionate amount of time. And if you're not able to take those as you're going forward, that can make life particularly difficult. So yeah, it is something you do need to think through really very carefully.
I think something that you mentioned yesterday, Robert, was making sure you're keeping the right type of school for you and for your family as well. Whether that is a day school or a boarding environment and that comes with it. So that's a real important thing to do. You know, whether it fits for the family as well as yourself as the potential head of the school.
Yeah.
The scale of the job as well nowadays is it's quite vast, isn't it? We all, you know, as senior leaders, we look and we see just the hours that our heads have to put in, and it is it's daunting. But we're all here because I think something's obviously clicked where we thought, you know what, we can do that. I can do that. But it's just what has to be sacrificed in a way, because there will have to be sacrifices in order to do the job well, because you know there's no point doing it unless you're going to do your very best.
Yeah, but I'll make the point again this morning. I think I did yesterday. You know, you throw yourself into it, and it's the biggest rush when it goes well. That's why we all do it. It's a bit like being the pop star on stage, I think, sometimes, isn't it? You know, when the audience start cheering, that's what they live for. And it's the same as a head when things are going well, and you can actually have one of those out-of-body experiences and look down on your school and go, you know what? I've done this.
Yeah.
It really is, and that's why we do it. It's a brilliant feeling, despite the peaks and troughs. And other than that, some people just plain bossy and want to be in charge, and that's fine as well.
Sick of being bossed about.
Okay, has everybody had the opportunity to say what they want to say? Should we move back to the presentation, and then there'll be another opportunity to discuss later? Thank you. So we're going to keep everybody on the screen at the moment. I'll just minimise that.
You've muted yourself, Ellen.
Start again, that's better, isn't it? Thank you. So obviously being a deputy head, being an assistant head is really good preparation for actually taking on a headship, but the roles are very, very different. As a deputy, you should be involved in strategy, but it's usually more about the operational running of the school and the day-to-day priorities that you face. As a deputy, you'll probably be spending quite a bit more time in the classroom as well. So trying to juggle both of those things can be a challenge. You can also be the person as a deputy that is resolving a lot of conflicts. These can be conflicts between pupils and staff, on occasion between staff and other members of staff, or even the staff and the head. And it's quite difficult as a deputy to predict what each day may hold. So if you're super organised, I think that can be a challenge as a deputy. But depending on the school that you find yourselves in, obviously your roles could be widely different. So for me, my experience of being an assistant head and a deputy was largely about sort of the firefighting elements to the role and dealing with the unexpected realities that you could face every day. I think I'm also facing that role quite a bit at the moment in the role that I'm currently in because of COVID-19, because everything is different day on day and you can't prepare for every eventuality. As the assistant head last year, I was more involved in the day-to-day running of the school, so in charge of timetabling and duties and cover and that kind of thing, but also trying to lead the teaching and learning and the curriculum side of things. What I expected headship to be like isn't necessarily the journey I've experienced so far. Obviously, I took on the role at Easter when everybody was in lockdown. So as I mentioned, we were all in that situation where we were having to write policies for teaching and learning remotely and decide upon the platform that we were going to use to deliver that teaching and learning. And as a head, I had a lot of parents saying what worked, what wasn't working, what they'd like to see done differently. And I think that was quite a challenge, because obviously the staff were obviously navigating rough seas themselves and taking on lots of new training, if you like, to be able to offer that remote teaching provision, and working very, very long hours. But the parents didn't fully appreciate the hard work that was going on behind the scenes to make all of that happen. And so trying to balance that with a very small staff team, because a number of our staff had actually been furloughed, was very, very challenging. As a deputy, we've talked about how your autonomy might be a little bit more limited, but I think if you can have that dialogue with your head, there might be some things that they're quite happy to delegate to you to give you that experience that you might require to take on a headship role. Just going to just try and go back to my PowerPoint. It's not actually allowing me to move on to, just going to stop sharing and reshare, I think, the screen. Can you see now the role of the head, or am I just looking at that myself? Oh, please bear with me if you can still hear me. Having a few technical issues here, but hopefully I'll be back with you now.
Yeah, that's working, Ellen.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Okay, just going to go from there. Perfect. Okay, so the role of the head. This is what I perceive the role of the head to actually be. Depending on the school you're in, this will obviously differ slightly. But establishing the values and vision of the school, that is the key thing that needs to be communicated to all staff, pupils, parents, carers, and the wider school community. I think that you need to be prepared to be able to share your values and your visions with the interview panel when you are going for a role. But you do need to be mindful that obviously you can't change that overnight, and depending on whether or not you are going for a role within a school that you're already working in, as I was, or whether you're going to actually inherit a role, will also play a part in how much of that you can change quite quickly. In terms of managing staff and delegating responsibilities, for me, that was really about asking the question, are staff in the right roles, and are they holding the right responsibilities, or have they indeed inherited the role? I would say that it's quite important that you get that right quite early on, because not all staff are actually in the right posts. And I think for me, it was about having the opportunity to carry out a staff audit and be able to see where people's strengths and areas for further improvement lay. Ensuring high quality teaching and learning is also a big part of the job. This can take many different roles, in the sense that obviously you would observe teachers through performance management, but also lesson visits, looking at books, looking at data, having pupil progress meetings with staff. A number of things can actually be discussed to ensure that that is happening. But where it isn't happening, then I think you have to be brave. You have to have those difficult conversations, and you can't actually let poor practice go unnoticed. Leading staff and pupils to success. Again, developing the right team is critical. Getting the relationships right with the staff is key, so that you can get the staff on board and take them on your journey. Giving the staff and the pupils the opportunity to grow is really, really important. So when you are an incoming head, actually make a point of getting to know each and every member of staff, treating staff with respect and humanity, and actually knowing how each of those members of staff work is really, really important, so that when you do need to have those difficult conversations, you have an awareness of how people might react and some of the things that might be going on in their personal lives as well as their work lives. I can't see any of you actually. I'm just trying to work out if I can actually put you back on screen. But anyway, can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, no, thank you for that. So I can't see any of you. I don't know where you've gone. In terms of supporting and developing the staff, that is something that is really, really important, offering the right amount of support to staff, but equally offering the right amount of challenge. So making sure that the standards that you set are high and that those standards are met. Don't necessarily believe what people tell you, go on that fact-finding mission for yourself. I think that's really important, that all staff have an opportunity to prove themselves, and you're not just listening to what other people have said about them, because their views might differ from your own. So getting to know the staff and seeing what CPD they need is really, really important, and not waiting until a member of staff has their opportunity to have a performance review, having regular conversations with staff, what's working well, what could be done differently, and actually holding people to account and offering them the support where they need it. Obviously, inset is a big thing, but it needs to be something that actually is relevant to the whole staff, and where people can share best practice and go and watch each other within a classroom setting. That can all be very, very useful in helping to develop the skill set of staff. So one thing that I have done recently is I've appointed a new member of staff who has been using Talk for Writing for a number of years, and this is a new initiative which we implemented last September, and having somebody with more experience of that has been really, really beneficial, as he's been able to share best practice through things like the staff meetings that we've had so far. Formulating objectives and putting policies in place and achieving those things is again one of the key roles of a head. You will be responsible for signing off all of the policies, so actually having a good working knowledge of those policies that have been written and ensuring that your staff also do, and not only are they reading those policies, that they are actually ensuring that what's in those policies is carried out across the board so that it's consistent in terms of the approach. I've alluded to the fact that school finances can be one of the key roles of a head, depending on how much support you get. That might be that you're just given a budget and you have to make sure that there isn't a deficit, or you might have a bigger role within that. Liaising with external contacts and the governors. I would say that when you apply for a headship, make sure you can work with the governors, because governors can be tricky people. A lot of governors might have been in a headship role themselves, and therefore do offer quite a bit of challenge, but I would say make sure that they're not trying to run the school for you, but actually challenging you, looking for answers to make sure that the school is as good as it can be in terms of the teaching and learning, in terms of the finances, in terms of the safeguarding. But make sure you can work with those governors and that you know that they will be supportive and that they have got your back. In terms of the marketing and the PR, again, depending on the type of setting that you're working in, this could be a big role or it could be a lesser role. For me, this summer, a lot of my time was spent meeting prospective families and marketing the school. Due to COVID-19, I think it worked in our favour in some sense, because we had been able to offer excellent remote teaching and learning. We had actually opened from June the 1st for preschool reception, year 1 and year 6, and in full for the 6 weeks that we were open. But we also had other year groups coming back for at least a week at a time. So all children from 3 to 11 had actually been in school prior to the summer holidays, which really helped in terms of well-being of the pupils, but also I think made it easier for them to transition back in September. So I think in terms of being able to share that with prospective parents worked in our favour, because some children that had come from state schools that hadn't offered the same remote teaching and learning, it offered the parents the reassurance that they needed, that if there was another lockdown, we were well prepared and would cater for their needs. Now, I know that many state schools did offer excellent remote teaching and learning. It just so happened that the pupils that wanted to join us in September hadn't had such a positive experience, or had had very little or no contact with their school since March. So marketing and PR, being that person that is the figurehead for the school, sharing your vision and values, getting to know the families, and not just getting them through the door, but building up that partnership working between home and school is really important. So obviously, once you've been appointed, there will be a lot to do in order to manage the lead-in period. Again, for me, I didn't really have much of a handover because the head did leave quite abruptly due to COVID. But having that background in how the school worked really did help me. So in terms of identifying the priorities that you need to learn and achieve during that lead-in period is really key. There will be things that you can do later on, so it's about making sense of what you need to know to assume the role and what you can actually leave until later. So it's quite difficult to juggle the demands of being a deputy and or an assistant head in another setting and spending time in a new setting. So do pace yourself, don't take on too much too soon. There will be things that you can do later. Again, working backwards from key deadlines, deciding what you'll tackle and when, and make sure that you have the time that you need to be able to do the job well. It might be that you have a PA that can take some of the things off you, so don't be afraid to delegate where you can. Negotiating your relationship with the outgoing head. So obviously, depending on whether you have been appointed internally or externally, will have an impact on this. I already had a good working relationship with the outgoing head, but equally I was mindful that I didn't want to tread on his toes. So, you know, he was aware that I was taking over the baton, if you like, and very supportive, and I was lucky in that respect. Not everybody will find that the transition is quite so smooth. It depends really how successful or how popular the head is. One thing I've mentioned already is establishing good relationships with the staff before joining the school. I think that really helps, because obviously a change of leader will make some of them very nervous. So if they can get to know you as a person beforehand, I think that eases the transition. And where you have the opportunity to meet with pupils, parents, the wider school community and the governors prior to taking up the role, I think is hugely beneficial. So again, I would like the opportunity for us to discuss a couple of these questions here. So where do you see yourself going next? What is your leadership journey? And is there anything that you need to do to be able to broaden your experience, to put you in a really strong position to be able to step up and make that leap into headship? Thank you.
Yeah, guys, if you'd like to unmute and feel free to show us your face once again.
I think it's bridging, for me, it's bridging the gaps. I think, you know, you were talking about that yesterday, Robert. I think definitely getting more involved in the assessment, that's a huge area. And just finding out that the nitty-gritty of the finances, really, budgets and stuff, shadowing my current head and seeing how she deals with all those areas, and our assessment lead as well, who I work closely with anyway. But you know, there's get to grips with the details really.
What sort of school are you in, Gilly?
It's a state school, Catholic primary in Moortown in North East. It's a, you know, fairly nice area, but we do have a mixture of our demographics, fairly mixed.
Yeah, and so another key area as well that Ellen hinted at was is that ability to get involved with the governors where and when you can.
Yes.
And possibly to network either through your local cluster or through some. A lot of the Catholic schools have families of schools as well.
We do, yeah.
We're taking all those opportunities too.
Thank you.
Where do you sit on all this, Lee? Are you?
Sorry?
Where do you sit on all this? What's your situation at the moment?
I've been in my school now for a couple of years. I'm a full-time teaching deputy, so I've got that sort of challenge having a class of children like pretty much all week, and then having this sort of school senior leadership side of stuff to try and help move the school forward. So that's kind of the workload's pretty tough at the minute. So it's been quite useful really listening to what people sort of their thoughts on going into headship and workload and stuff. I can't imagine it being any more really than
we really appreciate you all being here today, and so there's a number of colleagues who emailed who were with us yesterday, who couldn't be with us today because real life takes over, and that's just, you know, this is indicative, isn't it? But yes, I think you're absolutely right. From say I'm a governor in school, I'm working with a couple of heads at the moment, and the strong message that's coming out is everybody's up against it. And then just when you think you've got everything taped, somebody, my wife's school, somebody got a year group partner got track and traced, so suddenly she's lost all her PPA time because she's having to then organise somebody new to come in and look after the other class, you know, and sort out all that bits and pieces as well. So, you know, this can't last forever. And yes, if you can survive in this, I would honestly say you can probably survive anywhere afterwards. You know, it really doesn't get any worse than this.
No, and I think it is like you say, there's not an end in sight. We're going to have to live with this for quite the foreseeable future, aren't we? So I think our worst nightmare would be that certain bubbles need to get sent home, and part of the class might be in having the class teacher in front of them, and the other half might have to actually be taught remotely from home. So it's that poor teacher who's then going to be trying to juggle both potentially. So it's those challenges that may lie ahead as well that are in the back of our minds. I think nobody can relax because nobody knows what tomorrow is going to bring.
Should we move on?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see if I don't lose you all again. For some reason, the gallery view suddenly disappeared when I started sharing my screen, so might not be appearing to be looking at you. So let's just jump ahead a little bit. Okay. So my advice to you, which I hope you'll find useful, if you don't, please choose to ignore it, would be to make use of professional networks. I actually belong to a group of fellow head teachers who understand the process of transition that I'm going through better than anyone else, and I found that to be really, really invaluable. I found out about that network, I think through Facebook or LinkedIn, I can't remember now, but I actually requested to join that, and as a result we have a WhatsApp group of 30 heads all around the country, all working in very different settings, who all can actually be people that can turn to for advice. And so we use that WhatsApp group regularly, but we also meet once a month through Zoom to look at different aspects of a headship role. So the last one talked a little bit about how to strike that work-life balance, and we said that unless it was 50-50, then it wasn't actually a balance, and I don't think anybody can get that 50-50 work-life balance, and talking about actually prioritising the rocks in your personal life as being the things that are really important, and then the rocks in your work life, what do you really need to focus on in school that should be the key priorities, and everything else being pebbles. And it was quite interesting because looking at the rocks and the pebbles, I seem to be dealing with lots of the pebbles more than the rocks. So I think I'm hoping that my role isn't necessarily how it's going to be long term, but if you can, seize the opportunity to join those professional networks. Seeking support from external agencies and professional associations, again, depends very much on the setting that you're in. So you might belong to a union, and quite often they can offer some useful advice. You might actually have a connection with something like, in an independent school, the Society of Heads or HMC, and again you have the opportunity to network with colleagues in similar roles, and that's been really, really useful. Developing social networking for professional development. So I am getting a little bit more used to the world of Twitter and LinkedIn and Facebook for social networking for professional development, and it's quite interesting because it allows you to actually hear about what's going on in lots of different educational settings, to hear about recommended reads, courses that you can go on, and other things like that. So if you haven't joined Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook for your professional life, then I would strongly recommend doing that. And reading books about education and leadership. There have been a number of books that have been recommended to me. I haven't had a huge amount of time recently to read any new books, but these are some of the ones that I would advise if you are considering moving from the deputy head, assistant head role to headship. So some of these you may be familiar with. Making the Leap and Moving from Deputy to Head by Dr. Jill Berry. Again, she is one of the contacts that I have as somebody on my LinkedIn, Twitter network. She has actually been into both GSAL and offered training, and she is actually also mentoring the senior school head teacher here at Silcoates. So I have had the opportunity to mix with her a little bit as well. So reading what she said, some really useful tips that I have quite often referred to in my leadership journey. Also 2 other books by Mary Myatt, Hopeful Schools and High Challenge, Low Threat, How the Best Leaders Find the Balance. Again, very recommended, easy read. And one that I think not only talks about well-being in terms of pupils, but also the staff, the Wellbeing Toolkit by Andrew Cowley, Sustaining, Supporting and Enabling School Staff. So if you're wanting to read something that you haven't actually read before, I would highly recommend all of those. Some really useful advice and quite easy reads. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. So thank you for listening. This has been an opportunity for me really to reflect on my journey. As I say, my journey in school with the pupils back on site has only been 14 days. So I've got a lot to learn. I'm looking forward to that journey. I'm looking to really, really get my teeth into lots of new things. But as I say, we're actually working under challenging times, but seize the opportunities and be brave, have courage, and make that leap, because I don't think you'll regret it.